Picture this. It's December 2nd, 2025. A Tuesday morning in San Francisco. The fog is heavy, but the mood inside an unassuming office building in the Mission District is heavier. For 3 years, this building was the centre of the universe. It was Mecca for tech bros, the pilgrimage site for terrified world leaders, and the birthplace of the most important technology since fire. But today, the energy is different. It smells like stale coffee and panic. Sam Altman, the man who was supposed to save humanity, or destroy it depending on which podcast you listen to, hit send on an all-staff memo. The subject line isn't AGI achieved, it's essentially, oh god, stop everything, we are losing. It's a code red. For years we were told OpenAI was unstoppable. They had the lead, the talent and the momentum. But in the blink of an eye, the narrative fractured. The undisputed king of AI suddenly looked very mortal. How did the company that defined the future suddenly find itself trapped in the past? Today we're tearing open the sealed documents and looking inside the panic. This is the story of the fall of OpenAI's dominance, and the brutal reality check delivered by an old enemy waking up from a long nap. Buckle up, it's going to get messy. On, the hubris of the 400 billion non-profit. To understand the panic of December 2025, we have to rewind a bit. We have to understand just how high the pedestal was that OpenAI fell from. Imagine you're a software engineer in late 2023 or throughout 2024. You live in the Bay Area. Rent is absurd, but it doesn't matter because the VC money spigot is flowing like Niagara Falls, and all that water is flowing in one direction. OpenAI. For about 2 solid years, OpenAI wasn't just a company, it was a theological concept. They didn't just have a product, they had the product. ChatGPT wasn't a chatbot, it was a cultural cornerstone. It was writing high school essays, debugging senior engineer code, and composing terrible poetry for desperate valentines. By early 2025, the private market valuation of OpenAI had ballooned to an eye-watering $400 billion. Let's put that in perspective. That's bigger than ExxonMobil. That's roughly the GDP of Denmark. All for a company that, on paper, was still figuring out how to actually make a consistent profit, and was technically bizarrely controlled by a non-profit board that had already fired its CEO once for not being candid. Remember that fiasco in November 2023, when the board fired Sam Altman, and 5 days later, after a mutiny where 95% of the staff threatened to quit and join Microsoft, he returned in triumph. That moment cemented a dangerous idea inside the company culture. We are untouchable. We are too big to fail. We are destiny. Hubris is a hell of a drug, and OpenAI was freebasing it. They operated with an air of inevitability. While other companies were trying to figure out business models, OpenAI was releasing glossy videos of Sora making hyper-realistic videos of woolly mammoths wandering through Tokyo. They weren't competing, they were flexing. And who were they competing against anyway? Anthropic? Sure, Claude was good. It had a bigger context window, it was better at creative writing, and it felt less like a scolding librarian than GPT-4. But Anthropic was the safe, academic cousin. They weren't killer capitalists. They didn't have the killer instinct. Meta? Zuckerberg was doing his open source thing with El Llama, flooding the zone with free models. It was chaotic and impressive, but it wasn't a centralized, consumer-facing threat to ChatGPT's dominance. Google? Oh please. In 2023 and 2024, Google was the industry laughingstock. Remember the Bard launch? The wrong answer about the James Webb Space Telescope wiped $100 billion off Alphabet's market cap in one day. Google was seen as a bloated, bureaucratic dinosaur, too terrified of its own shadow to ship anything good, paralysed by innovator's dilemma. They were the company that invented the transformer architecture that GPT is based on, and then let Sam Altman eat their lunch. Inside OpenAI, the joke was that Google's code red, declared back when ChatGPT first launched in late 2022, was just them, running around, screaming in a burning room looking for the fire exit. OpenAI felt they had an insurmountable moat. They had the brand name. ChatGPT had become a verb like Google or Photoshop. They had the user habits. Hundreds of millions of people started their workday by logging into openai.com. And most importantly, they had the vibes. They were the cool kids. But here's a little dark truth about the tech industry. Vibe shifts happen slowly, then all at once. While OpenAI was busy doing victory laps, restructuring its board and trying to figure out how to spend $7 trillion on chips, the dinosaur down in Mountain View was waking up, and it was pissed off. The assumption that Google would remain incompetent forever was the single biggest strategic error of the decade. OpenAI forgot the golden rule of warfare. Never corner a wounded animal with $100 billion in cash reserves and a monopoly on global information. By mid-2025, the cracks were starting to show. Users began noticing that GPT-5, the iterative update to GPT-4o, felt stagnant. It was lazy. It refused to code complex tasks. It lectured users on morality instead of just doing the job. It felt like a product designed by a committee terrified of lawsuits rather than a tool for builders. The community started murmuring. The vibes were off, and in the exponential age of AI, if you aren't accelerating, you're dying. OpenAI was standing still on a treadmill set to maximum speed. They just didn't realize it until the ground disappeared from under their feet. 2. The Gemini shock. When the dinosaur learned to sprint. If you want to pinpoint the exact moment the tide turned, you have to look at late 2024 and the rollout of Google's Gemini 3 into early 2025. This wasn't just another model update. This was Google emptying the clip. For 2 years, Sundar Pichai, Google's CEO, looked like he was sleepwalking through a nightmare. But behind the scenes, he had done something drastic. He merged Google Brain and DeepMind, two warring internal factions that hated each other, forcing them to work together under Demis Hassabis. He told them essentially, stop publishing papers and start shipping a weapon. And they did. When Gemini 3 dropped, the AI community, the researchers, the hardcore coders, the people on Hacker News initially rolled their eyes. Great, they thought, another benchmark gaming blog post from Google. Then they got their hands on the API. The shift was visceral. It wasn't just that Gemini 3 was marginally better on some academic test. It was fundamentally different in how it worked. The reasoning gap. The biggest shock was agentic reasoning. You could give Gemini 3 a vague multi-step task, like research the competitive landscape for vegan dog food in Germany, draft a 5-slide pitch deck structure, and write the introductory email to potential investors. And it wouldn't just hallucinate a generic response. It would break the task down, browse the live web, using Google Search obviously, synthesize the data, and execute the steps sequentially without needing frantic hand-holding. ChatGPT, by comparison, felt like a brilliant but distracted intern who needed constant supervision. You had to prompt it step by step, and half the time it would forget the context 3 turns later. The full stack flex. This is where the economics come in, and we'll get deeper into this later, but it's crucial here. OpenAI relied heavily on Microsoft's Azure cloud and expensive NVIDIA GPUs. They were renting their infrastructure. Google owned the infrastructure. They'd spent a decade secretly building their own AI chips, TPUs, tensor processing units. When Gemini 3 launched, Google flexed this advantage hard. They offered context windows so massive you could paste entire novels into the prompt, and the response times were near instant. While ChatGPT users were staring at a blinking cursor waiting for a response during peak hours, Gemini users were getting paragraphs of complex text in milliseconds. Speed is a feature. Reliability is a feature. The defections. Then came the public embarrassments. High-profile tech leaders started publicly cheating on OpenAI. The pivotal moment, the real gut punch, came in late November 2025, Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, a guy who lives and breathes hype, tweeted something that sent shivers down the spines of OpenAI investors. "I've used ChatGPT every day for 3 years. Just spent 2 hours on Gemini 3. I'm not going back." The leap is insane. Reasoning, speed, integration. It feels like the world changed again. When the CEO of Salesforce, a company that had deep ties to the OpenAI ecosystem, publicly declares your product's obsolete, that's not a red flag. That's a 5-alarm fire. The data backed it up. Reports started leaking that daily active usage for ChatGPT had plateaued for the first time in history, while Google's AI usage across Search, Workspace, and Android was vertical. Developers were quietly rewriting their apps to switch from the OpenAI API to Gemini's, citing lower costs, better reliability, and fewer arbitrary refusals to generate content. The narrative had flipped. Google was no longer the clumsy incumbent. They were the juggernaut with infinite resources finally executing at speed. OpenAI was no longer the nimble disruptor. They were the besieged castle, running low on supplies with the enemy at the gates. And inside that castle, Sam Altman realized the walls were thinner than anyone thought. 3. The Purge, inside the Code Red war room. So what does a Code Red actually look like inside a $400 billion company? It's not just people running down hallways with sirens blaring. It's actually much quieter and much scarier. It looks like calendar invites disappearing. It looks like Slack channels going silent. On December 2nd, the directive came down: focus or die. For the last year, OpenAI had become a bloated empire. They were trying to do everything. They were building search engines, ChatGPT, to kill Google. They were building voice assistants to kill Siri. They were exploring chip manufacturing to kill Nvidia. They were even rumoured to be working on hardware devices with Johnny Ive. The Code Red memo was a guillotine for all of that. Reports indicate that non-essential projects have been frozen. The team working on the Pulse personal assistant reassigned. The team building the ad network to monetize free users paused. The weird side projects involving robotics shelved. The message from leadership was brutal. If it doesn't make ChatGPT smarter, faster, or better at reasoning right now, kill it. Imagine being a product manager at OpenAI. You've spent 8 months building a cool new feature that lets ChatGPT integrate with your smart fridge. You're 2 weeks away from launch. Then you get the email. Your launch is cancelled. Your team is dissolved. You're now reporting to the reasoning division, and your job is to figure out why Gemini is better at Python coding than your model is. This is the all-hands-on-deck moment. Why the panic? Because in the tech world, there is a concept called churn velocity. When a user switches from iPhone to Android, it's a pain. You have to move your photos, your contacts, learn a new UI. It's sticky. But switching from ChatGPT to Gemini, it takes literal seconds. You just type a different URL. There is zero loyalty in AI. We're all mercenaries. We go to whoever has the smartest brain. OpenAI knows that if they lose the smartest model crown for even 6 months, the user base will evaporate. And if the users evaporate, the training data stops flowing. And if the data stops, the model stops improving. It's a death spiral. So the company is currently pivoting to release a rushed update, leaked internally as Project Garlic, or an accelerated version of the O1 series updates. They are trying to brute force a win. But rushing complex AI deployment is like trying to defuse a bomb while sprinting. You might save the day, or you might blow your legs off. 4. The Ship of Theseus. Where did the wizards go? To understand why OpenAI is struggling to punch back, we have to talk about the people throwing the punches, or rather, the people who aren't there anymore. There's an old philosophical thought experiment called the Ship of Theseus. If you replace every plank of wood in a ship one by one, is it still the same ship? If you replace the CEO, the chief scientist, the CTO, and the co-founders of OpenAI, is it still OpenAI? Let's look at the casualty list. It reads like the credits of a tragedy. Ilya Sutskever, the chief scientist, the spiritual guru of the company, the man who chanted, "Feel the AGI" during company offsites. He left in mid-2024 to start Safe Superintelligence Inc., taking a chunk of the top talent with him. Andrei Karpathy, the AI wizard beloved by everyone, he left to go build his own things. Mira Murati, the CTO who actually ran the place while Sam was jet-setting. She quietly exited, rumoured to be burnt out by the constant pivoting and drama. John Schulman, a co-founder and the guy heavily responsible for RLHF, the thing that makes ChatGPT talk like a human. He jumped ship to, wait for it, Anthropic. By late 2025, the founding fathers of OpenAI were mostly gone. The cafeteria wasn't full of visionary researchers anymore. It was full of product managers from Facebook and growth hackers from Uber. Why does this matter? Because AI isn't just code, it's art, it's intuition. The people who built GPT-4 had a deep, almost magical understanding of how these neural networks learn. When you lose that institutional knowledge, when the wizards leave the tower, you're left with apprentices trying to read the spellbooks. This brain drain is the silent killer behind the code red. You can have 100,000 or 100 GPUs, but if you don't have the genius researchers who know how to tune the hyperparameters just right, you're just burning electricity. Google, on the other hand, their team has been remarkably stable since the merger. The DeepMind crew is locked in. They are veterans. While OpenAI was having a Game of Thrones-style boardroom coup every 6 months, the Google researchers were just shipping code. Subpoint, the culture clash. There are reports that the culture inside OpenAI has shifted from mission-driven to profit-driven. When you raise money at a $400 billion valuation, you aren't a research lab anymore. You're a product factory. New hires are being given aggressive targets. Increase retention by 5%. Decreased inference cost by 10%. That's fine for a normal software company. But for an AGI company, that kills the magic. You can't KPI your way to superintelligence. The code red is an attempt to get that magic back, to force the company to stop acting like a corporation and start acting like a startup again. But you can't unring a bell. You can't un-IPO a culture, even if they haven't technically IPO'd yet. 5. The data wall and the law of diminishing returns. Now let's get technical for a second. But I promise to keep it simple. Why hasn't OpenAI just released GPT-5 and crushed Gemini? Why all the delays? Why the rumours of Orion, the codename for the next flagship, failing to meet expectations? Because they hit a wall. A really big, invisible wall. For a decade, the scaling laws were the Bible of AI. The theory was simple. More data plus more compute. Smarter AI. It was a straight lineup. If you made the model 10x bigger, it got 10x smarter. But in 2025, that line started to curve. Reports suggest that OpenAI's newest models are suffering from diminishing returns. They fed the model the entire internet. They fed it every book ever written. They transcribed every YouTube video. And the model got a little bit better, but not a lot better. It turns out there isn't infinite high-quality data in the world. They ran out of internet. Google, however, has a secret weapon that OpenAI doesn't. Proprietary data. Think about it. What does Google have? YouTube. Not just the transcripts, but the video understanding. Google Docs Drive. Wait, they promise they don't train on this. But for enterprise models, the lines are blurry. Android, real-world usage data. Maps, spatial data. While OpenAI is scraping the public web, which is increasingly full of AI-generated slop, creating a feedback loop of garbage, Google is sitting on a goldmine of fresh, human-generated data. The code red is partially a panic about this data bottleneck. OpenAI is frantically trying to figure out synthetic data, using AI to write textbooks for other AIs to read. It's like a snake eating its own tail. If they get it right, it's infinite intelligence. If they get it wrong, its model collapse. The AI starts speaking gibberish and hallucinating facts because it's been trained on its own echoes. There are rumours that the reason GPT-5 was delayed is that early versions were boring. They were safe, accurate, but lacked the spark of reasoning that Gemini 3 has unlocked. Google found a way to make the model think before it speaks, System 2 thinking. OpenAI is playing catch-up on a technique they popularised with the O1 series, but failed to scale effectively. The irony is palpable. OpenAI started the race, but they might have run out of fuel right before the finish line. 6. The $100 billion check engine light. We need to talk about the elephant in the room. The very expensive, very impatient elephant, Microsoft. For years, this partnership was the romance of the century. Satya Nadella, Microsoft's CEO, wrote the checks, and Sam Altman spent them. It was a perfect marriage. Microsoft got the coolest tech in the world to stuff into Excel and Bing, and OpenAI got access to the Stargate, the infinite compute cluster needed to train gods. But in late 2025, the honeymoon is officially over, and the divorce lawyers are circling. Why? Because training these models isn't just expensive, it's financially suicidal unless you have a path to massive profit now. We're talking about electricity bills that rival the budget of small nations. We're talking about data centers that drink enough water to drain a lake. OpenAI is burning cash at a rate that would make a 1980s rock star blush. Some estimates put their burn rate at $8–10 billion a year just to keep the lights on and the servers humming. When you are the undisputed king, investors don't care about the burn rate. They call it buying growth. But the literal second, you fall to second place, that investment starts looking like debt. The Code Red panic is heavily fueled by pressure from Redmond. Microsoft is looking at Google and sweating. Google owns their own chips, TPUs. Google owns their own energy infrastructure. Google's cost per query is significantly lower than OpenAI's. OpenAI is relying on NVIDIA GPUs that cost $30,000 a pop. Google is using homegrown silicon that cost a fraction of that. In a price war, the guy who makes his own bullets always wins. There are whispers that Microsoft is quietly hedging its bets. They've been investing in other labs. They've been building their own smaller models, the Phi series, that don't rely on OpenAI. If OpenAI can't prove with this Code Red pivot that they can beat Gemini 3 decisively, Microsoft might just decide that OpenAI is a legacy partner rather than the future. Imagine the humiliation. OpenAI becoming the Internet Explorer of the AI age, once dominant, now just a default setting that people switch off to download Chrome. 7. The agent betrayal. Promises versus reality. Let's step away from the boardroom and look at the product. Why are users actually leaving? It comes down to one broken promise. Agents. For 2 years, Sam Altman promised us agents. He told us that soon, ChatGPT wouldn't just be a chatbot, it would be a digital employee. You would say, plan my vacation to Japan, and it would book the flights, reserve the hotels, email your boss, and buy your tickets. It's late 2025. Can ChatGPT do that? No! It can write a list of hotels. It can draft an email, but it can't push the buttons. It can't execute. It gets stuck on captchas. It gets confused by pop-up ads. It hallucinates flight prices. But guess who can do that? Gemini 3. Because Google controls the browser, Chrome, and the operating system, Android, their agent capabilities are actually working. Gemini can click buttons in Chrome. It can read your Gmail. It can access your Google Calendar. It has permissions that OpenAI simply cannot get legally. OpenAI is locked outside the house looking in. They built a brain in a jar, but the jar has no hands. Google built a brain and gave it the keys to the entire Google ecosystem. This Code Red is a frantic attempt by OpenAI to build a computer use interface, software that lets ChatGPT take over your mouse and keyboard to do things. But it's clunky, it feels like a hack, and security teams at major corporations are terrified of it. You want us to give an AI control of the mouse? Are you insane? Meanwhile, Google's integration feels native. It feels safe. It feels like magic. The realization hitting the industry right now is stark. Intelligence is nothing without access. A genius locked in a padded room is less useful than a mediocre assistant who has your credit card and a phone. OpenAI built the genius. Google built the assistant. 8. The vibe shift in the valley. You can measure the health of a tech company by looking at the swag index. In 2023, wearing an OpenAI hoodie in San Francisco was like wearing a Supreme Box logo. It was a status symbol. It meant you were part of the revolution. Today, it feels a bit like wearing a WeWork shirt in 2019. The cool factor has evaporated, and this matters more than you think. The smartest 22-year-old graduates from Stanford and MIT aren't lining up for OpenAI anymore. They're going to the new scrappy startups, or surprisingly, to Google DeepMind. Why? Because OpenAI stopped shipping fun. Remember when they released GPT-4 and it was mind-blowing? Remember the glitch art? Remember the sheer chaos of Bing Sydney declaring its love for users? It was wild. It was punk rock. Now, OpenAI feels corporate. Their safety rails are so high that the model feels lobotomized. You ask it to tell a joke, and it gives you a lecture on inclusivity. You ask it to write a story, and it refuses because the villain might be too scary. Gemini 3, in a weird twist, feels looser. Google realised that users want a tool, not a nanny. This cultural stagnation is part of the code red. The internal memo allegedly calls for regaining our edge. But you can't mandate edge. You can't schedule a meeting to be cool. OpenAI is currently suffering from incumbents paralysis. They're so afraid of bad PR, so afraid of safety lawsuits, and so afraid of regulators that they have bored their user base to death. And in the attention economy, boredom is a capital offence. 9. The nuclear option. Project Garlic and the safety brakes. So what happens next? What does a cornered animal do? It attacks. This is the most dangerous part of the code red. Rumours are swirling that Sam Altman is preparing to pull the nuclear option. For 3 years, the mantra at OpenAI was safety first. They delayed releases to red team them. They hired thousands of experts to try and make the AI racist or dangerous, just so they could patch those holes before the public saw it. But when you are losing, safety looks a lot like bureaucracy. Sources say the Code Red directive includes a loosening of these safety protocols. Not officially, of course. The PR team will still say safety is our DNA. But internally, the risk tolerance has shifted. They are preparing to launch Project Garlic. Yes, that's the rumoured codename. Tech companies are weird. This is expected to be the raw, unfiltered reasoning model that was previously deemed too expensive or too unpredictable for the public. It's the equivalent of a race car driver reaching down and ripping out the seatbelts to shed a few pounds of weight. Sure, the car goes faster, but if you crash, you don't walk away. If OpenAI rushes a model that accidentally helps a teenager build a biological weapon, or crashes the stock market with a fake report, or leaks private health data, it's game over. Congress shuts them down. Microsoft pulls the plug, but they might take that risk. Because the alternative, fading into irrelevance while Google owns the future, is a fate worse than death for a Silicon Valley founder. 10. The verdict. Is it actually over? Let's take a deep breath and step back from the ledge. Is OpenAI dead? Are we writing their obituary today? No, of course not. They still have hundreds of millions of users. They still have the most famous brand in the world. They still have some of the smartest engineers on the planet. This isn't the end of OpenAI, but it is the end of the OpenAI monopoly. For a brief, shining moment in history, from roughly November 2022 to mid-2025, OpenAI was the only game in town. They were the sun, and everyone else was just a planet orbiting them. That era is finished. We have officially entered the browser wars phase of AI. Just like Netscape versus Internet Explorer, just like iPhone versus Android. It's going to be a messy, violent slugfest between 2 or 3 massive giants. Google has the data and the ecosystem, Meta has the open source army, OpenAI has the first mover advantage in the Microsoft war chest. But here is the cold, hard truth that provoked the code red. Being first doesn't matter if you aren't the best. Ask Yahoo, they were first. Ask BlackBerry, they were first. Ask MySpace, they were first. History is littered with the corpses of companies that invented a category, only to be crushed by a ruthless competitor who sat back, watched, learned, and then did it better. Google watched, they learned, and now they are doing it better. The code red isn't just an internal panic. It's a signal to the world that the king is bleeding. And in the shark tank of Silicon Valley, blood in the water only means one thing. The feeding frenzy has begun. Final thoughts. So where does that leave us? The users, the people just trying to get our emails written and our code debugged? It leaves us in a pretty good spot, actually. Competition is good. Monopolies are lazy. The fact that Google is terrifying OpenAI means that OpenAI has to wake up. They have to innovate again. They have to stop polishing the safety rails and start building the rocket ship again. We're about to see a rate of progress in the next 6 months that will make the last 3 years look like slow motion. Project Garlic versus Gemini 3 Ultra, the clash of the titans. But if there is one lesson to take away from the fall of OpenAI's dominance, it's this. Moats are made of sand. You can build the biggest castle in the world, raise $100 billion, and hire the smartest wizards. But if you stop looking at the horizon, if you get comfortable, if you think you've won the game of technology, the tide will come in, and the dinosaur you thought was extinct will be the one standing over your ruins. I want to know what you think. Is Sam Altman going to pull a rabbit out of the hat and save the day? Or is Google inevitably going to crush them with their data advantage? Let me know in the comments. I actually read them, unlike ChatGPT. If you want to stay ahead of this war and make sure your career doesn't get code-redded by an AI agent in 2026, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. I'll be tracking every move these giants make so you don't have to. Thanks for watching, and remember, don't blink, you might miss the future. I'll see you in the next one.